Story 1, it started with a missing person. Always does, doesn't it? A taxi driver, Kola, who never came home after a late shift. In a city like Ibadan, missing people are unfortunately not rare. But this felt different. Kola was reliable, a family man. His wife said he had called just hours before, mentioning he'd picked up a fare heading toward the outskirts of the city. After that, nothing. His phone stopped ringing. His taxi didn't return. It was like the ground had swallowed him whole. It wasn't long before Kola's friends decided they couldn't wait for the authorities to act. They would search for him themselves. I was part of that search. Kola and I had grown up together, and if there was any chance of finding him alive, I wasn't going to sit by and wait. The first couple of days were exhausting but uneventful. We scoured the city, checked the usual spots, hospitals, police stations, even ditches along the highway. Then someone mentioned a forest at the edge of town, a place we'd heard whispers about but never had reason to visit. People called it the evil forest, though most of us dismissed that as superstition. Still, Kola had been heading in that direction, and desperate times call for desperate measures. We gathered a group, about 7 of us, and headed into the forest one early morning. The place was unsettling from the start. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches intertwining overhead to block out the sun. It was eerily quiet too, like the forest itself was holding its breath. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of our boots on the dry ground. About an hour into the search, someone spotted a building in the distance. At first, we thought it might be a school or maybe an old factory, abandoned and forgotten. As we got closer, though, it became clear that something was very wrong. The smell hit us first, thick, rancid, and unmistakable. It clung to the air, making it hard to breathe. Flies buzzed in dense black clouds around the building's entrance. I felt my stomach turn, but we pressed on. Kola could be in there. He had to be. The door was hanging off its hinges, creaking ominously as we pushed it open. The sight that greeted us inside is something I'll never be able to erase from my mind. Bodies. So many bodies. Some were whole, others weren't. Limbs were scattered across the floor like discarded trash. Bloodstains smeared the walls, and the air was so thick with decay I had to cover my mouth and nose with my shirt. There were cages too, small, rusted, and filthy. Inside them were people, alive but barely. Their eyes were sunken, their skin clinging to their bones like wax melted over a frame. They didn't even cry out when they saw us, just stared, empty and hopeless. We called for help immediately, our voices shaking as we tried to explain what we'd found. Some of us stayed behind to tend to the survivors as best we could, while waiting for the authorities to arrive. The more we searched the building, the worse it got. There were rooms filled with personal belongings, watches, shoes, wallets, all neatly organized like trophies. Another room had what looked like ritualistic markings scrawled across the walls, along with crude altars covered in dried blood and bones. The authorities arrived hours later, swarming the place with investigators, medics, and soldiers. They took over quickly, cordoning off the area and escorting us out. 8 people were rescued from the cages that day, but they were in such bad shape that I don't think most of them could even tell us their names. The police found more body parts buried in shallow graves around the compound, along with evidence suggesting human trafficking and ritual killings had taken place there. But they didn't find Kola. I held on to hope for a while. Maybe he'd been taken somewhere else. Maybe he'd escaped and was still out there, waiting to be found. But as days turned into weeks and then months, that hope started to wane. The case made headlines, of course, the Ibadan Forest of Horror, they called it, but no arrests were ever made. There were rumors that politicians and wealthy individuals were involved, that this was part of some larger network of ritualistic killings. But if anyone knew the truth, they weren't talking. The survivors, they never gave us much. Most of them couldn't. They were too traumatized to speak, and the few who could gave accounts that were disjointed and fragmented. They described being taken in the dead of night, blindfolded and dragged to the compound. Some said they'd been there for months, maybe even years. None of them remembered seeing Kola. I still think about him. Every time I drive past that forest, I can't help but wonder if we missed something. if there's still some clue hidden in those twisted trees that could tell us what happened to him. But the forest is off limits now, patrolled by soldiers who keep curious locals at bay. Maybe it's better that way. The thing that haunts me the most isn't the bodies or the blood or even the thought of Kola lying somewhere in that forest, lost and forgotten. It's the silence. The way the forest felt when we first stepped into it, like it already knew what we were about to find. Like it was waiting. Story 2. It was October 2018 when Carly Goose went missing. I didn't know her personally, but Mono County is small enough that you recognize faces, hear names. I remember seeing her picture on social media the day it happened. Big smile, long blonde hair, 16 years old, a teenager with her whole life ahead of her. Then just like that, she vanished. I was in Bishop at the time, a small town tucked away in the California high desert, surrounded by mountains that seemed to stretch forever. News travels fast in a place like this, and Carly's disappearance hit everyone like a punch to the gut. Girls don't just disappear around here. It wasn't Los Angeles with its sprawling chaos. We were quiet, tight-knit, the kind of place where you'd hope someone would notice if something seemed off. What stood out the most was the strange, unsettling circumstances surrounding her last known hours. Carly had been at a party the night before. Nothing too wild from what I'd heard. Typical teenage stuff. But something happened while she was there. People said she was acting odd, paranoid. Some thought she'd taken something, maybe smoked pot or tried something stronger, though no one seemed sure. Whatever it was, it scared her enough to call her stepmother, Melissa, to come pick her up. Melissa drove her home, and that's where things get blurry. According to Melissa, Carly was still terrified, convinced that someone or something was coming for her. She didn't sleep, and neither did Melissa, who claimed she stayed up to watch over her. At some point early in the morning, Melissa said Carly calmed down and went to bed. By the time Melissa woke up, Carly was gone. I can't forget the timeline. Carly was last seen around sunrise that morning, walking away from her family's home toward US Highway 6. Witnesses reported seeing her along the road, looking disoriented, barefoot, and wearing only a tank top and pajama pants. The desert gets cold at night, and even colder in the early hours. She couldn't have gotten far dressed like that. Yet by the time anyone went looking, she disappeared without a trace. The search began immediately, but it was as though Carly had been swallowed by the earth itself. Helicopters scanned the desert, search dogs combed the brush, and volunteers spread out for miles in every direction. Every lead turned into a dead end. No clothes, no footprints, no phone. Just nothing. As days turned to weeks, theories started swirling, fueled by whispers and speculation. Some people pointed to drugs, said Carly had wandered into the desert, too high or paranoid to find her way back. Others suspected she'd been abducted, though there were no signs of foul play. And then there were the darker theories, the ones people muttered under their breath, but never said outright. The Gus family quickly became the center of the mystery. Melissa's interviews raised eyebrows almost immediately. At first, she sounded heartbroken, desperate for answers. But the more she talked, the stranger her stories became. Details seemed to shift. How she'd spent the night watching over Carly, how long Carly had been in bed before she vanished, whether Melissa herself had fallen asleep. One interview stuck with me. Melissa claimed she'd seen Carly walk away that morning and watched her until she disappeared down the road. But in other statements, she said she'd woken up to find Carly gone. Which was it? People couldn't help but ask. The inconsistencies made everyone uneasy. Even Melissa's behavior seemed odd. She posted videos online, pleading for Carly's return, but they felt off, too polished, too rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. And then there was the tension between Melissa and Carly's biological mother, Lindsay. The two women never seemed to agree on anything about Carly's disappearance. Publicly, Lindsay suggested that Melissa might not be telling the whole truth. That accusation alone was enough to fuel rumors for weeks. But what got to me the most, what still haunts me, is that no one knows what Carly was so afraid of that night. She'd told Melissa she was scared someone was going to kill her. That fear was real. You could hear it in Melissa's interviews. Carly wasn't just spooked, she was petrified. And then within hours she was gone. The theories got wilder as time went on. Some people blamed the train, claiming Carly could have fallen into a ravine or wandered into the desert and succumbed to the elements. Others pointed fingers at human trafficking rings, suggesting she'd been taken and moved far beyond Mono County. Some whispered about ritual killings or even alien abductions, the kind of speculation that crops up when real answers feel impossible. But none of it fit. Carly was last seen near a highway, a busy stretch of road. If she'd fallen or gotten lost, surely someone would have noticed. If she'd been abducted, there would have been a struggle, evidence. And if she'd run away, well, she wouldn't have gone barefoot, dressed for bed. It didn't make sense. Years have passed and the case remains open, officially unresolved. Carly's parents still search, still hope. Her face is on missing posters, billboards, and social media posts, her smile frozen in time. People talk about her disappearance like it's a ghost story, a reminder of how quickly life can shift from ordinary to unexplainable. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever know what happened to Carly Goose, if her story will end with closure or just linger as one more unsolved mystery. Story 3. The Dyatlov Pass incident is one of the most unsettling, unsolved mysteries out there. No matter how many times I revisit it, the details never stop sending chills down my spine. It's not just a tragic hiking accident, it's the kind of event that refuses to be neatly explained, no matter how many theories are thrown at it. Let me take you back to the beginning. In early 1959, a group of 10 experienced hikers, students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, set out on a trek across the Ural Mountains. Their goal was Oderton Mountain, a difficult but achievable journey for such an accomplished group. The leader was Igor Dyatlov, a seasoned outdoorsman who had organized the expedition carefully, ensuring every detail was mapped out. Before long, one of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, fell ill and was forced to turn back. If you believe in fate, you could argue this illness saved his life, because the other 9 hikers, the ones who kept going, never made it home. The group made steady progress until early February, when they encountered worsening conditions. Heavy snowfall slowed their movement, and on February 1st, they set up camp near Kolatsiakhl, Mountain of the Dead in the local Mansi language. Nobody knows exactly what happened next, but something, or someone, made them flee their tents in such a blind panic that they tore through the fabric from the inside, running half-dressed into the freezing night. This is where things start to spiral into madness. Weeks later, search teams found the campsite. The tents were abandoned, partially covered in snow. The hikers' shoes and belongings were still inside. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of an animal attack or an avalanche. Just the eerie reality that these people had chosen to run from their shelter into the bitter cold. The bodies were discovered at various distances from the camp, some partially buried in the snow, some clustered together as if they had tried to huddle for warmth in their final moments. But the more investigators examined them, the stranger things became. Some of the victims had died of hypothermia, which was expected, but others had injuries that didn't make any sense. 2 of the bodies had fractured skulls. Several had broken ribs, yet there were no external wounds, no bruises or cuts that would suggest blunt force trauma from an attack or a fall. Something had crushed them without leaving a visible mark. And then there was the final horror, the discovery of Lyudmila Dubinina. Her body was found missing her tongue and parts of her facial tissue, as though something had torn them away. To this day, nobody knows how or why. Soviet authorities investigated the incident, but no solid explanation emerged. Some speculated that an avalanche had startled the group, but that didn't explain the injuries or why they had cut open their tents instead of leaving in an orderly fashion. Others whispered about military experiments, claiming that the hikers had accidentally wandered into some kind of classified weapons test. Strange radiation was found on some of their clothing, fueling theories that some secret Soviet technology had played a role. Then there were the bizarre reports from witnesses who claimed to have seen glowing orange orbs in the sky near the mountain on the night of the incident. Did the hikers witness something they weren't supposed to? Was something watching them? Whatever happened, it was enough to make the Soviet government block off access to the region for several years after the event. The final official report summed up the deaths in the most cryptic way possible: an unknown compelling force. a phrase that raises more questions than it answers. Theories have piled up over the decades. Some say the hikers were attacked by a wild animal or an unknown assailant, though no footprints were ever found besides their own. Others claim infrasound, low-frequency sound waves created by strong winds, might have caused severe panic and hallucinations. There's even speculation about supernatural forces, given the eerie history of Kolatskaya itself. We might never know the truth. But that frozen campsite, the footprints in the snow leading to nowhere, the crushed bodies without external wounds, it all paints a picture of something wrong. Something terrifying enough to send 9 seasoned hikers running into the night, barefoot, half-dressed, into certain death. And that's why the Dyatlov Pass incident still haunts people to this day. It defies logic. It refuses explanation. It's the kind of mystery that lingers, the kind that whispers to you in the dark, reminding you that sometimes we just don't have answers. Story 4. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. I'm the kind of guy who watches horror movies and scoffs at the jump scares. But after what happened to me in 2015, I don't scoff anymore. I was a freelance photographer back then, living in Colorado. I did a lot of real estate photography, abandoned buildings, and the occasional urban exploration gig for magazines. That summer, a local history buff hired me to take pictures of the old Ramsey house in Boulder. Yeah, that house. The one where JonBenet Ramsey was murdered in 1996. Now, I wasn't thrilled about it. I wasn't into true crime, and I sure as hell didn't want to step into that circus. But the pay was good, and curiosity got the better of me. The house had been bought and sold a few times, but no one ever stayed long. It was empty again. The owner had given me access for one night. Just me, my camera, and my gear. I got there around 8 p.m., right before sunset. The house looked normal, big, well-kept, nothing eerie about it. If you didn't know what had happened there, you'd never guess. I let myself in through the front door, locked it behind me, and started setting up my camera. I went room by room, taking wide shots first. The place had been staged like they were trying to sell it again, but it felt off. Like no matter how much furniture they put in, the house still knew what it was. Then I got to the basement. The second I stepped down there, the air felt thick, heavy, like I had walked underwater. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard something, a whisper. I froze. It was faint, just a breath of sound, but I swear it came from the little room where they found her body. I forced myself to move toward it, my hands sweating around my camera. The room was empty, just concrete walls, dim light from the single bulb hanging above. I took a few photos, trying to ignore the goosebumps crawling up my arms. Then the whisper came again. Closer. I spun around. Nothing. Just the silence pressing in on me. Hello? My voice came out shaky. I laughed at myself. Jesus, I'm losing it. Click, click, click. I took more shots, checking my camera's LCD screen, and then I saw it. The last photo I had taken, it wasn't empty. There was a shadow, small, standing just behind me. I turned so fast I nearly tripped. The room was empty, but I wasn't alone. The whisper came again, right by my ear. Help me! I bolted. I don't remember running up the stairs, don't remember grabbing my bag. All I remember is fumbling with the front door lock, yanking it open, and nearly falling onto the porch. I didn't stop running until I was in my car. I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the house. The front window was dark, but I swear I saw something move behind it. I never looked at the photos again, deleted every single one. I don't care if it was my imagination or something worse. I just know that whatever was in that basement wasn't supposed to be there, and it sure as hell wasn't human. Story 5. It was a cold December night in 2014 when Jessica Chambers' story became one of the most disturbing tragedies I've ever heard. I didn't know her personally, but in Cortland, Mississippi, a town so small you can name most of its residents, everyone felt connected. Jessica was 19, vibrant, with the kind of smile that lit up a room. She was well known and well liked around here. When word spread about what had happened, It was like the air itself had been sucked out of the community. That night I was home, flipping channels on TV when my phone buzzed with a text from a friend. "There's been an attack," it said. "A girl on fire." At first I thought it was a horrible prank. No one expects something like that in a town like ours. But when I turned on the local news, the truth hit me harder than I'd thought possible. Jessica had been found walking down the road near her car, engulfed in flames. Paramedics arrived on the scene to find her barely alive, every inch of her body scorched except for the soles of her feet. She was gasping for air, her throat destroyed, burned from the inside. Gasoline had been poured down her mouth, ignited in one of the cruelest and most unimaginable acts I'd ever heard of. The paramedics later said the smell of burned flesh followed them for days, even weeks. They broke down in tears during interviews, unable to speak about what they'd witnessed without their voices shaking. Jessica tried to tell them who did it. She used what little strength she had left to utter a name, but her words were garbled, too damaged to be understood. By the time she reached the hospital in Memphis, it was too late. She didn't survive. The next day, her car was discovered at the scene, a small Kia parked on a back road. It had been set on fire too, but investigators found enough evidence to start piecing together what happened. They believed Jessica had been attacked inside or near her car, the fire consuming everything before she managed to stumble down the road. The detail that stuck with me was the gasoline poured down her throat. It wasn't just a murder. It was an act of hatred, deliberate and personal. Someone wanted her to suffer. The community was shaken to its core. People gathered for vigils, lighting candles and leaving flowers at the spot where Jessica had been found. Her parents spoke to reporters, their grief raw and unfiltered. Her father, Ben Chambers, was a mechanic, practical, stoic, the kind of man who didn't show emotion easily. But on camera, his voice cracked and tears rolled down his face. "She didn't deserve this," he said over and over. "She didn't deserve it." The investigation was brutal, both in scope and in what it uncovered. The suspect, Quentin Tellis, was someone Jessica had been loosely associated with, a name that popped up repeatedly in witness statements and phone records. He'd had a criminal history, but nothing that compared to this. The evidence pointed to him. Cell phone data placed him near the scene, and his story didn't quite add up. But there was no smoking gun, no definitive proof. And despite multiple trials, the case fell apart each time. The jury couldn't agree. Meanwhile, the town was drowning in theories and speculation. Was it Tellis? Was it someone else entirely? People dug through Jessica's past, pointing fingers at relationships, friendships, even family members. Everyone had their version of what happened that night, but no one had answers. And then there was the question that kept me awake at night. Why Jessica? Why would someone do this to her? This young, bubbly girl who loved cheerleading and dreamed of going to college. Was it a random act? Was it revenge? Every theory felt hollow, and none of them brought comfort. The paramedics who found her still struggle to talk about it, even years later. One of them described how Jessica's burned lips tried to form words, how her eyes held a mix of terror and determination. She wanted to tell them who hurt her, but she couldn't. Her voice was gone, destroyed by the flames. "It's the most helpless I've ever felt," the paramedic said, choking back tears. "She was begging for help, and there was nothing I could do." Jessica's story doesn't have an ending. Not really. Tellis remains the prime suspect, but without conclusive evidence, justice feels out of reach. Her family still waits, still hopes for answers. Story 6. The first time I heard about Ben McDaniel, I was sitting with a group of fellow cave divers, swapping stories at a diner near Devil's Den in Florida. Someone brought him up casually, almost like an urban legend, but the mood in the room shifted. You could see it in the way everyone went quiet, the way some stared at their coffee as if the cup held answers to questions no one wanted to ask aloud. I'd heard his name before, in whispers among the community, but I didn't know the full story then. Now, it's a tale that sticks with me every time I gear up to dive. Ben's disappearance happened on August 18, 2010, at Vortex Spring, a popular dive site in Ponce de Leon, Florida. I've been there myself, a place that's both serene and deceptive. Above water, it looks almost tranquil. a crystal-clear spring surrounded by tall trees. Below, it's another world entirely, a dangerous, sprawling cave system that demands respect, caution, and experience. It's the kind of place that reminds you nature doesn't owe you anything, no matter how skilled or prepared you think you are. Ben was 30 years old, described as an adventurous but inexperienced diver. He wasn't certified for cave diving, which is a serious and specific discipline requiring both training and equipment. But he was passionate, maybe reckless, and it seems he wasn't one to let rules stand in his way. That night, he went into the water at Vortex Spring, and he never came back out. The first clue something was wrong came the next morning when his truck was found still parked at the site. It was locked, his wallet and cell phone untouched inside. That in itself wasn't unusual. Divers don't take valuables underwater. But the fact that his truck hadn't moved all night, that raised alarms. Search teams were called in immediately, and this is where things get strange. When divers entered the cave, they found a pair of air tanks staged at the entrance. Staging tanks is normal for deep cave dives. It's a precaution to ensure you've got enough air for the return trip. But something about these tanks didn't sit right. They weren't filled with a proper gas mixture for cave diving, just regular air. That's not only dangerous at depth, it's also puzzling. An experienced diver wouldn't make that mistake, and Ben, despite his inexperience, would have known better. It felt off, almost like they were left there to create the illusion of a dive. The world's top cave divers were brought in to search for him, some of the best trained and most fearless people in this community. They combed through every inch of the system, pushing past restrictions, navigating tight passageways, and descending into the most remote parts of the cave. These are divers who find bodies when no one else can, who recover the lost and bring closure to families. But with Ben, there was nothing. No body, no sign of equipment, no evidence that he had ever gone deeper into the cave. It doesn't make sense. If Ben had died in the cave, they would have found him. Decomposition gases would have made him buoyant, or his remains would have been caught on something. But there was no trace, nothing except those staged tanks near the entrance, like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. That's when the theories started. Some believe Ben went into the cave, got stuck, and ended up in a section too dangerous or inaccessible for even the best divers to reach. It's possible. Caves are unforgiving places, and mistakes in judgment can be fatal. But the experts who searched the system swear they covered every possible area. If Ben was there, they would have found him. Others think the scene was staged, that Ben never went into the cave at all. The tanks, the locked truck, they raised the question of whether this was deliberate. Did Ben fake his own death? It's no secret he'd been going through a rough time. Financial struggles, the grief of losing his younger brother. Maybe he wanted to disappear, to start over. It's a theory his family vehemently denies, and honestly, it doesn't sit right with me either. Why leave his truck and wallet? Why leave questions instead of answers? Then there's the darker theory, foul play. Vortex Spring had a reputation, not just as a challenging dive site, but also as a place where shady things happened. The owner of the spring at the time was known for his erratic behavior, and he died under mysterious circumstances just 2 years after Ben's disappearance. Could Ben have crossed paths with someone dangerous that night? It's an unsettling thought, but it's one that lingers. The thing about caves is that they don't give up their secrets easily. They're vast, silent, and indifferent. And maybe that's why Ben's story feels so haunting to me. I've stood at the edge of cave entrances, feeling the pull of the unknown, the weight of the water pressing down like a reminder that these places don't care about us. They're just there, existing, waiting for the next person to come too close. I think about Ben every time I dive, about the staged tanks, the truck left behind, the silence that followed. What happened to him? Did he slip into the shadows of the cave, lost in a place no one can reach? Or was he lost long before he ever got in the water? Whatever the answer, the mystery of Ben McDaniel isn't just about a missing diver. It's about the questions that linger, the pieces that don't fit, and the eerie realization that some mysteries might never be solved. Story 7. I grew up hearing stories about the Humboldt River, the way it twists through Nevada like a vein carved into the earth. It's peaceful now, a place people visit for fishing or quiet reflection. But every time I see it, I can't help but think about what happened there on August 12th, 1939, the day the city of San Francisco train derailed. My grandmother used to talk about it, her voice dropping to a whisper whenever she mentioned the wreck. She'd been a young girl living in a nearby town when it happened, and even decades later, she remembered the way people in Hardin, Nevada, spoke of the crash. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mystery, a crime, and to this day, no one knows who's responsible. The train was a sleek, modern marvel of its time, operated by the Southern Pacific Railroad. It was carrying passengers and crew, speeding across the West at anywhere between 60 and 90 miles per hour, heading toward its namesake city. People boarded it expecting an uneventful journey, conversations, meals in the dining car, a night spent watching the landscape blur by. Then, as the train crossed the bridge over the Humboldt River, something went horribly wrong. The rails had been tampered with, investigators later said, deliberately sabotaged. At that speed, the train couldn't adjust, couldn't brake or compensate. It derailed violently, the cars crumpling like paper as they plunged off the bridge. Some passengers were thrown from the train, their bodies landing in the shallow water below. Others were trapped inside the twisted wreckage, unable to escape as chaos swallowed everything. 24 people died that night, men, women, children, and many more were injured. Their lives changed forever. My grandmother said the screams could be heard for miles, carried on the wind like ghostly echoes. Locals rushed to the scene, doing everything they could to help, pulling survivors from the wreckage and comforting those who couldn't be saved. Days after the crash, investigators began searching the site for answers, combing through the twisted rails and the submerged debris in the river. That's when they found the tools, a wrench, a crowbar, other implements at the bottom of the Humboldt River, just beneath the bridge. These weren't tools that belonged to the railroad or the workers who maintained the track. They were out of place, suspicious. And when investigators pieced everything together, they concluded the rails had been deliberately sabotaged. The scene shifted from accident to crime, and the questions became darker, more chilling. Who would do something like this? Why? The saboteur hadn't just derailed a train. They'd killed innocent people in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. The investigation stretched on for months, but every lead seemed to hit a dead end. Suspects were questioned, locals, workers, transient travelers, but no one confessed. Some thought it was the work of anarchists or political extremists trying to send a message through violence. Others believed it was personal, a grudge against the Southern Pacific Railroad. Some whispered about revenge, suggesting someone might have been targeting a specific passenger aboard the train. But none of the theories brought answers, and none of the suspects faced charges. The community was left with haunting questions, the kind that lingered long after the wreckage had been cleared and the rails replaced. My grandmother said people in Hardin grew suspicious, looking sideways at their neighbors, wondering if the culprit might be someone they knew. At least one person did it, but was it more than that? Could an entire group have been involved? Were they watching the aftermath from afar, satisfied with the chaos they'd created? And then there was the bigger question, why didn't anyone confess? Even years later, the silence surrounding the case felt deliberate, like the truth was being buried beneath the same river where those tools had been found. I sometimes wonder what drives a person, or people, to commit such a calculated act of violence. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a moment of rage or impulse. Sabotaging rails takes time, planning, and precision. Whoever did it had to know the consequences. They had to know the train would crash and people would die. Even now, nearly a century later, the unsolved mystery of the city of San Francisco train derailment lingers in this part of Nevada like a shadow. People tell the story quietly, their voices tinged with unease. The Humboldt River flows on, serene and indifferent. But to me, it always seems to carry the weight of that night. The screams, the lives lost, the secrets that sank into its depths. I don't know if we'll ever find out who did it or why, but every time I pass by Hardin, I think about the bridge, the twisted rails, and the people whose lives ended there. And I wonder if the answer is closer than we realize, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it to light. Story 8. I was only a kid when the Tylenol poisonings happened, But I remember the fear gripping the adults around me like it was yesterday. We lived in the suburbs of Chicago, and what had started as just another fall day quickly turned into something that felt like the beginning of the end. People were frantic, rushing to their medicine cabinets, throwing out bottles of Tylenol like they were grenades about to go off. It started with an unassuming woman named Mary Kellerman, just 12 years old, who died in Elk Grove Village after taking Tylenol for a sore throat. Her parents thought nothing of it. Tylenol was practically a household staple, safe and reliable. That's how it worked, though. The killer didn't need to target anyone directly. They let the familiarity and trust people had in this little red and white bottle do all the work. Mary wasn't the only one. The same day, Adam Janis, a postal worker from Arlington Heights, also died after taking Tylenol. His family was with him, gathered at his home, trying to make sense of his sudden passing. Devastated and unsure, his brother Stanley and sister-in-law Teresa both took Tylenol to calm their headaches from the stress. Just hours later, they were dead too. 3 family members lost in the same home, on the same day, from the same bottle. The news spread like wildfire. By the time authorities pieced together what was happening, 5 more people were dead, including Paula Prince, Mary Reiner, and Mary McFarland. They were ordinary people with ordinary lives, trusting that Tylenol would ease their pain, not kill them. That's what made the whole thing so chilling. Anyone could be next. I remember standing in the store with my mom after the story broke. She clutched my hand so tightly it hurt. We walked down the pharmacy aisle where Tylenol bottles lined the shelves, silent and unassuming. She stared at them for what felt like forever before shaking her head and pulling me away. "We're not getting that anymore," she said. Her voice cracked just enough for me to know she was terrified, even if she didn't say it out loud. Investigators worked tirelessly to figure out how someone had pulled this off. The cyanide-laced capsules weren't tampered with at the factory. No, the killer had gone to stores, bought bottles, poisoned them, and then put them back on the shelves for unsuspecting customers to find. It was so simple, so methodical, it left everyone wondering how safe anything could be. How many other everyday items could be weaponized like this? It wasn't just murder, it was psychological warfare. What shook me the most was the randomness. The victims didn't know each other. There was no clear motive or connection, no vendetta or reason to suspect they'd been targeted. Whoever did it wasn't after revenge. They weren't even after money as far as anyone could tell. They were just doing it. It felt like a game, one with stakes so high it left the entire city, and eventually the entire country, reeling. The hunt for the perpetrator became the stuff of legend. Every lead seemed to run dry, every suspect just slippery enough to avoid being pinned down. There was one name that stuck out, James William Lewis. He sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson, Tylenol's parent company, demanding $1 million to stop the killings. He was charged with extortion and sentenced to prison, but to this day, he denies being the killer. And the evidence doesn't prove he tampered with the bottles. So who did? Decades later, and no one knows. The FBI reopened the case a few times, following new leads and reanalyzing the old evidence. There have been theories, of course, copycat crimes, lone wolves, conspiracies, but nothing definitive. Whoever did this vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a legacy of fear and doubt. But the world didn't forget. Johnson & Johnson pulled every bottle of Tylenol from the shelves, spent millions rethinking their packaging, and introduced tamper-proof seals that became the standard for the industry. The public changed too. Paranoia like that doesn't just go away. Even now, every time I open a pill bottle and hear the crack of that safety seal, I think about Mary and Adam and Stanley and Paula. I wonder who was behind it. I wonder if they're still out there, somewhere, satisfied with the chaos they created. The Tylenol poisonings were more than just murders. They were a wake-up call, a reminder of how fragile our trust in the everyday really is. And even after all these years, the mystery remains unsolved. It's not just about the victims, though of course it starts with them. It's about the scars the incident left on all of us. Scars we carry every time we open a bottle, and hope, deep down, that history won't repeat itself. Story 9. I still walk past the house sometimes, even though I shouldn't. It's boarded up now, overgrown with weeds and draped in silence. but it stands there like a ghost in the middle of a quiet Tokyo suburb. Setagaya was always a peaceful area, families walking their dogs, kids playing in the park. That's why what happened in that house is impossible to forget. The horror doesn't fade. Not for me, not for anyone who lived there when it happened. It was December 31st, 2000 when we found out. I was younger then, living a few streets over, home for New Year's with my family. Police cars and ambulances tore down the narrow roads early in the morning, lights flashing, but no sirens. In Japan, that silence means tragedy. News spreads fast in a neighborhood like ours, and by noon, everyone knew. Something horrible had happened at the Miyazawa house. The Miyazawas were a family of 4. Mikio, the father, Yasuko, the mother, their daughter, Nina, and their son, Ray. I didn't know them well, just saw them in passing. Mikio worked in media, always polite and reserved, while Yasuko was friendly and active in the community. Nina was in elementary school, a bright little thing who loved to show off her drawings. Ray, just 6 years old, was quiet but sweet. They were the kind of family you couldn't imagine anyone having a grudge against, but someone clearly did. The details of that night still make my stomach churn. The killer broke in through the bathroom window at the back of the house. From what investigators pieced together, Ray was his first victim. The poor boy didn't even wake up. He was strangled in his bed, a horrifying detail that made everyone shudder. Mikio fought back when he was attacked, but the killer stabbed him repeatedly, the wounds so vicious it left no question that rage was involved. Yasuko and Nina were found upstairs, their bodies bearing the same brutality. It wasn't enough to kill them. The killer had savaged them beyond recognition. But what happened after, that's what haunts me the most. The killer didn't leave. He stayed. For hours. Investigators found evidence that the intruder made himself at home. He ate ice cream from their fridge, left the wrappers crumpled on the counter. He sat at their computer and browsed the internet, even sending a message to Mikio's employer. He used the toilet and didn't flush. He rifled through their paperwork and left receipts and documents scattered across the floors. It was as if he felt no urgency, no fear of being caught. He moved through the house with the casual audacity of someone who thought they belonged there. He left behind his clothes too. A knife, blood-stained gloves, a scarf, and a jacket, all abandoned like garbage on the floor. Even his DNA, clear and identifiable, was found all over the house. You'd think with so much evidence, it'd be a matter of days before the killer was found. But 2 decades later, nothing. Not a single arrest. Whoever he was, he disappeared like smoke. There's no shortage of theories. Some say the killer was a drifter, someone who traveled into Setagaya and left the same night. Others insist he had military training, pointing to the strange blend of recklessness and precision in the murders. His DNA suggested he could have mixed ancestry, Asian and European, which is rare but not unheard of in Japan. But if he wasn't local, how did he know his way around the house so well? And why target the Miyazawas? What I can't stop thinking about are the little things. The ice cream, the computer, the paperwork. It wasn't just a random act of violence, it was personal. He spent time in that house, hours immersed in their lives. It wasn't enough to kill them. He had to linger, to claim their space as if mocking them even in death. The Miyazawa house has been empty ever since. The family who lived next door moved out within weeks, unable to bear the memories. Some people say the house is haunted now, that you can hear whispers or catch glimpses of shadows in the windows at night. I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in scars. That house is a wound in the middle of our neighborhood, a reminder that safety is an illusion. And the killer, he could be anyone. That's the part that eats away at you. Was he a stranger who slipped in and out of Tokyo unnoticed? Or is he still here, blending in with the crowds, walking these same streets? I don't know if we'll ever find out. But whenever I pass the house, I feel it. The weight of that night, the silence that lingers, and the unanswered question that still chills me to my core. Why? Why them? And why did he stay? Story 10. I didn't think much of the West Mesa at first. It's a stretch of desert on the edge of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Barren and quiet, with nothing but scrub and sand as far as the eye can see. People build homes there now, sprawling developments of houses and parks. But before all that, it was empty. Just land, forgotten. Until February 2009, when a story broke that shook the city to its core. It started with a dog, a family pet digging in the dirt near a construction site. The dog unearthed something strange, a human bone. That was disturbing enough, but it was just the beginning. Investigators were called to the area, and as the days passed, the full horror came to light. More bones, dozens of them. The remains of 11 women and one unborn baby scattered across the mesa. I remember the way the news described it, calm, clinical, almost detached. Human remains discovered on the West Mesa, they said, as though they were talking about lost artifacts, not people. But these weren't just bones, they were lives. The women ranged in age from teens to adults, some mothers, all loved by someone, and someone had taken them. What's chilling about the West Mesa bone collector isn't just the scale of the crime, it's the lack of answers. The investigators did their best, piecing together clues from what little evidence remained. Most of the women were identified as missing persons, many tied to Albuquerque's vulnerable communities, including those involved in sex work or struggling with addiction. They disappeared between 2003 and 2005, often without a trace. Their families left to wonder what happened to them. And now, years later, they were here, buried in the mesa like secrets someone wanted to keep hidden. The name Bone Collector came from the public, not the police. It felt fitting, though. Someone had taken these women, killed them, and left their remains scattered in the dirt. And whoever it was, they didn't leave much behind. No fingerprints, no murder weapon, no witnesses, just a barren stretch of land and the bones. The theories started almost immediately. People whispered about serial killers, pointing to similar cases in other states, though no definitive links were ever made. Some thought the killer might have been part of a trafficking ring, targeting women who wouldn't be missed, or so they thought. Others believed it was someone local, someone who knew the mesa well enough to use it as their graveyard. But none of it led anywhere. I can't stop thinking about how deliberate it all felt. The West Mesa isn't exactly hidden, but it's vast and quiet enough to feel secluded. You'd have to know where you were going, know where to dig, and how to avoid detection. This wasn't random, it was calculated, and the silence surrounding it feels just as calculated. The investigation remains open, but the leads have grown cold. Detectives followed every possible thread, tracking down known offenders and questioning suspects, but there was never enough evidence to make an arrest. Whoever the bone collector is, they're still out there, living their life while 12 others were left to decay in the dirt. Sometimes I wonder if the mesa itself holds the answer, if the land remembers what happened even if we can't. The winds that sweep across it feel heavier now, carrying the weight of those lives lost. People drive past it every day without realizing what's beneath them, without knowing the stories of the women who vanished. It's just land to them, forgotten, but not to me. The West Mesa bone collector isn't just an unsolved mystery. It's a haunting reminder that evil doesn't always leave clues. Sometimes it just leaves silence, and sometimes silence is the loudest thing of all. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.